When I first moved into the small two-bedroom apartment with Ryan, I thought of it as a temporary arrangement. He was a friend of a friend, someone who needed a roommate to split the rent while he finished graduate school. I had a steady job and a partner I'd been with for 3 years, so in my mind, the living situation was practical, nothing more. Yet from the very first week, I noticed how quickly Ryan became more than just a name on the lease. Ryan wasn't the type of guy I usually noticed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of casual masculinity that seemed effortless, he gave off the easy confidence of someone who never had to second-guess how people saw him. He worked out religiously, kept his hair cropped short, and laughed with the unself-consciousness of a man entirely at home in his skin. Everyone called him straight, and he never corrected them. He'd talk about women sometimes, girls from his classes, women he'd dated briefly, but never with much depth. It was always surface-level commentary, as if he were reciting lines expected of him. Our routines aligned quickly. We cooked dinner together more often than not, trading responsibilities with a rhythm that surprised me. He'd handle the grill, I'd season the vegetables. Late at night, when neither of us felt like sleeping, we'd linger in the living room, sprawled across opposite couches, trading stories about our days. I found myself looking forward to those conversations more than I should have, given I already had someone waiting for me across town. It wasn't as though I was unhappy with Daniel, my boyfriend. We had a history, stability, and the kind of familiarity that felt safe. But safe also meant predictable. Our relationship had grown into something steady, but muted a routine of check-ins and weekend visits, more about habit than hunger. Living with Ryan illuminated that contrast in uncomfortable ways. The first time I caught myself staring at him too long was on a Sunday afternoon. He came back from the gym, sweat-darkened shirt clinging to him, hair damp. He dropped onto the couch beside me, groaning dramatically about how sore he was. I laughed it off, but my eyes lingered on the line of his jaw, the curve of his neck, the rise and fall of his chest. It was a second too long, just enough for me to realize I was paying attention in a way I shouldn't be. Ryan never seemed to notice, or maybe he didn't care. He had a habit of closing physical distance without hesitation, leaning close when he wanted to show me something on his phone, nudging me with his shoulder when he cracked a joke. Sometimes, late at night, he'd stretch out on the floor of my room while I sat at my desk just talking. It wasn't unusual behavior for friends, but in those quiet moments, it felt like something else simmered beneath the surface. One evening, after a particularly long day, he dropped onto my bed instead of the floor. I looked up from my laptop, startled by the casualness of it. He propped himself up on one elbow, scrolling through his phone, acting as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I wanted to tell him to move, to remind him of boundaries, but I didn't. Instead, I closed the laptop and asked about his day. The conversation drifted easily. He told me about a fight he'd had with his ex, how she accused him of never opening up. Maybe she's right, he admitted, his voice low. I don't really let people in. For a moment, the air shifted. His eyes met mine, and I felt an undercurrent of something that had no name but carried weight. I told him that everyone has their own pace, their own way of letting people close. He nodded, thoughtful, then rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. I should have gotten up, should have left the room, but I stayed. There was something magnetic about his presence, something I couldn't quite rationalize but didn't want to escape. That night ended without incident. Eventually, he stretched, muttered something about getting some sleep, and padded back to his room. But long after, I lay awake, my thoughts restless. I told myself it was nothing, just a friend venting, just a roommate being comfortable in shared space. Yet deep down, I knew I was already crossing invisible lines, allowing feelings I shouldn't have to take root. It was the beginning of a subtle shift between us, one I couldn't name, but one that would soon demand a price. The night it finally happened began without any intention of crossing boundaries. Ryan and I had gone out with a group of his classmates, a casual evening that stretched far later than either of us expected. By the time we stumbled back into the apartment, the city lights had thinned, and silence hung over the street outside. We weren't drunk, just softened, looser, freer, our edges blurred. Ryan collapsed onto the couch, tossing his keys on the coffee table with a careless flick. "I swear," he muttered, laughing, "half the people in that program just want to complain about how busy they are." I laughed too, sinking into the chair opposite him. "That's grad school, isn't it? Paying a fortune to tell everyone how miserable you are." He grinned, the kind of grin that reached his eyes, then leaned his head back against the cushions. There was a heaviness in him beneath the laughter, though, and I recognized it. When the room quieted, he sighed, a sound that carried more weight than he meant to give away. "You ever feel like no one actually sees you?" he asked suddenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it landed between us with force. The question caught me off guard. Sometimes, I admitted, shifting in my chair. "Why?" He shrugged, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I don't know. I think I keep people at a distance. Safer that way, you know?" There was vulnerability in his tone I hadn't heard before. It drew me in like a door creaking open after being shut too long. I should have offered the kind of neutral comfort friends give one another. Instead, I said, "I see you, Ryan." His gaze dropped from the ceiling to me. Something lingered in that look, curiosity, uncertainty, something unspoken. My chest tightened, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. He pushed himself up, elbows resting on his knees. "You always listen," he said softly. "Not everyone does." The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. It pulsed. Every second hung heavier than the last. I could feel the line between us thinning, straining, begging to snap. Ryan stood, walked past me, and disappeared into his bedroom. I thought that was the end of it, but moments later he re-emerged, rubbing the back of his neck. "You coming to bed?" he asked, as if the invitation were casual, as if it weren't loaded. I blinked at him, unsure I'd heard correctly. "Your bed?" He smirked, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Yeah, why not? It's late, and you look like you're about to fall asleep in that chair." My instinct screamed at me to say no, to laugh it off, to go to my own room and shut the door. But his eyes held me, steady and searching, and my body moved before my mind could intervene. In his room, the air was warmer, heavier. He dropped onto the mattress, sprawling lazily, leaving space beside him. I hovered at the edge for a beat, then lowered myself down, heart hammering. We lay there in silence, the hum of the city faint through the window. I told myself this was innocent, two friends sharing space. But when his shoulder brushed mine, when his hand lingered on the sheets between us, innocence dissolved. He turned to face me, so close I could feel his breath on my cheek. "You ever wonder what it'd be like," he whispered, "if we didn't have to pretend?" The words unravel me. My resolve crumbled, and before I knew it, our lips met. Hesitant at first, then urgent, hungry. The kiss was a collision of denial and desire, years of unspoken boundaries shattering in an instant. Ryan pulled back, his forehead pressed to mine. "I don't know what I'm doing," he breathed, voice trembling, "but I don't want to stop." Neither did I. The night became a blur of touches, whispered confessions, and the terrifying thrill of surrender. Guilt threaded through every moment. But it was drowned out by the undeniable electricity between us. When I finally drifted into sleep, tangled in his arms, a single thought haunted me. Nothing could undo what we had just done. Morning light spilled through Ryan's half-open blinds, cutting across the room in sharp golden lines. I woke slowly, the weight of his arm draped over me, his breath steady against the back of my neck. For a fleeting second, I let myself sink into the warmth, the illusion that this closeness could exist without consequence. But reality pressed in quickly, heavy, and suffocating. Daniel's name flashed in my mind, along with the steady rhythm of his voice from our last phone call. I shifted beneath Ryan's arm, guilt settling into my chest like a stone. Ryan stirred, eyes blinking open, disoriented. He pulled his arm back, sitting up against the headboard. "Morning," he murmured, voice thick with sleep. His casual tone didn't match the storm churning in my head. "Morning," I echoed, my throat dry. We sat there in silence, neither of us brave enough to acknowledge what had happened. I could still taste him on my lips, still feel the heat of his body press mine. I wanted to speak, to put words to the chaos. But I feared anything I said would either make it too real or shatter the fragile quiet. Eventually, Ryan swung his legs over the side of the bed and stretched. "Coffee?" he asked, like we were any other pair of roommates waking up after an ordinary night. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to move, to break the tension. We drifted into the kitchen, performing our morning routine with studied normalcy, grinding beans, boiling water, pouring into chip mugs. Yet every glance across the counter was weighted, every brush of our hands when passing sugar or spoons carried a jolt we couldn't ignore. As we sat at the table, I tried to convince myself it was a one-time mistake. "We should probably not talk about last night," I said, finally staring into my coffee. Ryan didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me. "If that's what you want." "It's not about what I want," I muttered. "I have Daniel. I can't, this can't." The words knotted in my throat. His jaw tightened. "I know," he said. Then, softer, almost to himself, "I just didn't expect it to feel like that." The admission pierced me. I wanted to ask what he meant, to demand clarity, but fear held me back. If I pushed, I'd have to admit my own truth, that I hadn't felt that kind of hunger in years, not even with Daniel. The days that followed became a careful dance of avoidance and longing. We cooked together like always, watched movies on the couch, laughed over trivial things. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath it, everything had. I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes betraying the same confusion and desire that consumed me. At night, lying alone in my own bed, the memory of him returned relentlessly, the sound of his voice whispering against my skin, the way his hands had trembled slightly when they first touched me. I told myself it was just one night, an accident, a lapse. But my body didn't believe it, and neither did my heart. Daniel called one evening, his voice cheerful, oblivious. He asked when I'd be free to spend the weekend with him. I promised I'd come, but even as I said the words, I felt hollow. The thought of lying beside Daniel, pretending nothing had changed, filled me with a dread I couldn't explain. Ryan noticed. Later that night, as we sat in the living room, he asked quietly, "You okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't press, but the concern in his eyes lingered. The tension built until it was unbearable. We hadn't touched again, hadn't dared. But every moment alone together hummed with the memory of what we'd shared. The space between us was no longer neutral. It was charged, dangerous. One night, unable to sleep, I padded into the kitchen for water. Ryan was already there, leaning against the counter in the dim glow of the refrigerator light. Our eyes met, and for a long moment neither of us moved. "Do you regret it?" I asked before I could stop myself. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. Do you?" The truth balanced on the tip of my tongue, too heavy to speak. I should have said yes. I should have ended it there. But instead I stayed silent. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Then what do we do?" he whispered. I didn't answer. My heart pounded, torn between loyalty and desire, between the safety of what I had and the dangerous promise of what I'd found. That night, I returned to my room alone, but his question echoed in me like a drumbeat. "What do we do?" And I knew, with a clarity that terrified me, that this story wasn't finished. Days slipped into weeks, and what began as a single night of weakness settled into something heavier, something neither Ryan nor I could shake. The apartment, once a space of easy camaraderie, now carried an unspoken charge. Every glance lingered too long, every laugh felt edged with something deeper, every silence thickened with the memory of skin against skin. I told myself I could keep it contained, that what happened between us was an isolated incident, a secret folded neatly into the corners of my life. But Ryan wasn't content to fold it away. His presence became magnetic, a constant pull that chipped away at the walls I'd tried to rebuild. It showed in small ways first. He'd cook dinner and set aside my favorite portion without asking. He'd sit close on the couch, closer than necessary, his thigh brushing mine with a carelessness that wasn't careless at all. Sometimes, when we laughed late into the night, He'd let his hand rest against me longer than it should. It wasn't overt, but it was deliberate, a steady erosion of boundaries. Meanwhile, Daniel's voice became a reminder of everything I was betraying. Our phone calls grew shorter, more perfunctory. He noticed, though he didn't press at first. "You've been distant," he said one night. "Is everything okay?" I swallowed hard, staring at the shadow of Ryan's door across the hall. "Yeah, I lied. Just work." The truth was the guilt gnawed at me, but it came tangled with desire, and desire always won. One Friday evening, the tension snapped again. We had stayed in, too tired to go out. A storm lashed outside, wind rattling the windows, rain drumming steadily. The power flickered once, then held. Ryan stretched across the couch, remote, abandoned, his eyes fixed on me instead of the screen. "You ever think about that night?" he asked suddenly, voice low but steady. My pulse quickened. "Of course I do," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. He shifted closer, his knee brushing mine. "I can't stop," he whispered. "I should have pulled away." Instead, I let the silence answer for me. The kiss came quickly, inevitable, no hesitation this time. The storm outside roared. But inside the apartment, the only sound that mattered was the rush of our breaths. It was reckless, consuming, and yet strangely tender, as though both of us understood the fragility of what we were breaking. Afterward, as we lay tangled on the couch, Ryan stared at the ceiling. "What does this mean for you?" he asked, his tone heavy. The question lodged in my chest like a stone. I thought of Daniel, of our years together, of the promises I was now dismantling piece by piece. "I don't know," I whispered, and it was the truth. Ryan turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "I'm not asking you to choose," he said. "I just don't want to pretend it didn't happen. Any of it." His words settled over me, equal parts comfort and burden. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I couldn't erase what we'd done. But the weight of Daniel's name kept me silent. The storm passed by morning, leaving the city washed and quiet. Ryan moved around the kitchen making breakfast, humming softly to himself, as though the night before hadn't shifted everything again. I watched him, torn between the ordinary rhythm of our lives and the extraordinary pull I felt toward him. When Daniel called later, I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was warm, eager. He asked if I'd be at his place that weekend. I said yes, even though my body still carried the echo of Ryan's touch. That evening, as I packed a small bag, Ryan lingered in the doorway of my room. "Drive safe," he said, but his eyes told me everything his words didn't. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I knew I was standing on the edge of something I could no longer control. As I zipped the bag closed, my heart split between two lives, one of loyalty and one of undeniable desire. And for the first time, I realized neither path could remain hidden forever.